Yeah, back to work. Woo. I'm about to go to work, 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 work. No sleep. 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 See, that's the problem with the nation, they don't wanna work. That finessing got my present buried in the dirt. How much more you gotta see before you make a move? Oversleep and get you fired, don't you hit the snooze. Sticking to the code, all I know is order. Rolling with the script like a news reporter. If you knew the lingo, you would know the skrills. Soul like a waiter, keep a lot of tilts. Serpent in the mist, do a lot of flips. Men in these dresses got the mental kill. Tower about to tilt, tumble, tumble down. We about to lead, that's why we jumping round. Never understood you about to come around. I ain't nothing like the clowns, I don't dumb it down. Boy, I'm something like a roofer, bring the gut around. For betting on the father, I'ma double down. Work, 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 work.
Shalom, Shalom Kol Yisrael. This is Raah Pathwal Ben Yaakov, and you are viewing True Remnant Ministry. This is our Shabbat class on this Shabbat evening. It's hastening to the evening time, around about almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we told our Yah once again for allowing us to see another Shabbat day. Not only that, we are observing the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, during this time, which is a 7-day feast. So we are outside camping in tents and things of that nature. But I came inside to do this video teaching concerning one of the aspects of tabernacles, and that is in gathering. Okay, so we want to talk about in gathering, the Feast of Ingathering, and we're going to compare that and examine it with the parable that Messiah gave of the wheat and the tare. Okay, we're going to examine it, compare it, and see if there are similarities in the analogy that Messiah gave and in the commandments that Yah has given us concerning the 3 major feasts, which we're going to be dealing with: Passover, Feast of Weeks or First Fruits, and Ingathering, which is also known as Sukkot. Okay, so I want to send this email out right quick, right before we get started. I want to send this out to a few folks so that let's see here, just right before we get started here. Then we're gonna go ahead and get this show on the road. Hallelujah. So that praise Yah. Give me a few more minutes and we'll have this sent off here. All right, so we got this email sent off and everything. So once again, we told our Yah for another Shabbat day that He has allowed us to see. His love and kindness is renewed to us every morning. He allows us to another day to get our act together, to get deeper in this word, in these scripts, study the scriptures to show ourselves approved. Our workmen need not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the words of truth. All right. So our topic for today is the ingathering. The harvest is the end of the world. And we're going to be relating Exodus chapter 23, verse 14 to verse 16, with the passage of the parable that Messiah spake in Mathew chapter 13 concerning the wheat and the tare. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, in gathering the parable of the wheat and the tare. And like I said, we're going to be comparing Exodus chapter 23, verse 14 to verse 16 with Matthew chapter 13, where Messiah gives the parable about the wheat and the tare. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hallelujah. We want to go ahead and turn to the book of Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14. These are the three major feasts that the Most High gave. Excuse me, let me get my cloth right quick. This is the analogy of the three major feasts that Messiah gave. And the significance of these three major feasts is simply this: that these feasts represent an agricultural time period, okay? Between, at the beginning of Passover or Pesach, which starts on the 14th day of the first month, which is the first month in the Hebrew is pronunciated Abib. And we're going to get into the meaning of Abib. And Abib, during the month of Abib, was actually the time whereby seeds were sown in the field or in the ground as it relates to agriculture, because our ancestors, the ancient Israelites, depended upon the land to produce and yield their food. Okay, that's what they depended on. They were farmers. They were herdsmen. Okay, so they depended on these natural resources in order to, as a means of survival or as a means of living for food. Okay, so when we have Passover, Pentecost, it's a time also of examination. Okay, and agriculturally, Abib, or the first month of the Hebrew calendar, which occurs most of the time at the latter part of March or the earlier parts of April, where the springtime, what we call the spring season in the Gregorian calendar. A lot of times when the spring comes along, that is also when Abib, or the first Hebrew month, starts. Okay, so in the Gregorian calendar or the Westernized calendar, the beginning of the year starts in January. But according to the Bible, the biblical first of the month starts in either the latter parts of March or earlier parts of April. That's when it starts, okay? And it is called the month of Abib. And the two feasts that we have that occur in the first month is Passover and unleavened bread. And both of these feast days are feasts that require examination, whereby you have to examine yourself, okay? And that's why Paul wrote, he said, let us partake of the feast, not with the leaven of malice or hypocrisy, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity. He was referring to the feast of Passover and unleavened bread, okay? And also he goes further along in the chapter to explain that those that eat and drink of the body and the blood of Messiah unworthily, okay, shall receive damnation. That's why he said that a man ought to examine himself Because this is the time of examination. And even agriculturally, during the time of Abib, or the first month in which Passover and unleavened bread occurs, when the seeds would germinate and sprout out of the ground, the farmers would go and examine, all right, the young tender ears of grain. They would go in and examine the wheat, okay? And that was a form of examining their crop to make sure that it was going to grow successfully and produce successfully as well, okay? So that's one of the aspects. And then we have Pentecost, which a lot of us know Pentecost. Some people say Shavuot. I pronounce it in the Hebrew as Shabuah. Some people call it first Feast of Weeks, but it's also referred to as the Feast of Harvest, because at first fruits is when those seeds that were sown in the field during the time of Abib, or the first month, have germinated and grown to maturity, whereby they are able to bring forth fruit or start producing fruit. Okay, so the first fruits was an example of the first crop or the first produce that yield forth from those plants, and that those fruits were offered unto Yah as a sacrifice and as a offering of gratitude for the bounty that he was going to barak or bless them with the fruit of their labors. Okay, so that began the harvest. Okay, now we have the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, which is also referred to as the Feast of Ingathering, where that is the completion of the harvest, whereby the farmers, or those who were growing food at that time, would gather in the last remnant or the last produce of their crop. And after they did that, that would end the growing season, okay? And they would enter into the fall and the winter. And most of the time, they would store that particular harvest up for the winter months, okay? And they would put it into a barn or put it into a place to preserve it so they can eat on it throughout the winter, because there's very few things that you can grow during the winter time, all right? So we want to deal with that aspect and correlate it with the analogies that the Messiah gave in the parable of the wheat and the tare. Let's get started. First of all, before we do that, I want to read from the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, and I believe we want to start at verse 34. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 34, and I just want to show you that tabernacles and ingathering are basically the same feast, and they occur during the same time, but they have different aspects in which they are related to. Okay. While you're in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 34 says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, say, in the 15th day of the 7th month, it shall be a feast of tabernacles for 7 days unto you. On the first day shall be a Kodesh Migrah Chodesh, which is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work. 7 days shall you offer an offering made by fire unto Yah. On the 8th day shall be a Chodesh convocation unto you." So an offering made by fire unto Yah. I want to bring this aspect out, but this is very important to understand the spiritual aspect of this particular statement here. We know that we don't sacrifice or offer burnt offerings as our ancestors did in the times of antiquity, okay, or ancient times. We don't do that. We understand the Messiah is our ultimate sacrifice. All right, his body and his blood was offered on behalf of our sins. So therefore, the sacrifices that we give as a offering unto Yah are the fruit of our lips. We offer up our body as a living sacrifice, holy, or set apart, kadosh, and acceptable unto Yah, which is our reasonable service. That's what we do. So our lives become that offering. Our prayers become that sacrifice or that offering. Our worship unto Yah becomes a burnt offering unto Yah, offering that's made by fire. Now, what does the fire represent? A lot of times in scripture, you would see that even during the time of Moses, when Yah revealed himself to Moses on the Mount Sinai, he came to him in the form of a burning bush. Okay. Also, when the children of Israel entered out of Mizraim, or Egypt, the scripture says that a pillar of cloud led them by day, and a pillar of fire led them. A pillar of cloud of fire led them by night. All right. Also, we can skip all the way down to Pentecost or Shavuot or Shabuah, when the Most High, when Yeshua told his disciples to go to Jerusalem and tarry there until they are endowed with power from on high. And the scripture goes on to say in Acts chapter 2 that when the day of Pentecost had fully come, that they was all gathered on one accord, and the Ruach fell upon them as cloven tongues of fire. So the spirit of the Ruach of Yah also represents the fire of Yah. Okay, so we have to offer an offering made by fire unto Yah, which means we have to have that passion. We have to have the spirit of Yah in us, and that's why in the book of St. John, or John, chapter 3, I believe verse 16 or verse 18, where Messiah met the woman at the well, he told her that the hour cometh and the hour is where the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him in spirit and in truth. So we have to have the spirit and truth in order to worship Yah effectively and proficiently, okay? So that being said, that is the fire, that fire, that passion that we have to have towards Yah in worship and in prayer, in everything that we do, all right? He goes on to say, 6 days you shall offer offering made by fire to Yah. On the 8th day is a Kodesh convocation. He says, these are the feasts of Yah, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, to offer an offering made by fire unto Yah, a burnt offering, meat offering, drink offering, sacrifices, everything upon this day, besides the Sabbaths of Yah, and besides your gift, besides all your vows, besides all your freewill offerings, which you give unto Yah. Also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in, look at that, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto Yah 7 days. First day shall be a Sabbath, 8th day shall be a Sabbath. Okay, so he goes on to say that when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto Yah. When is that feast also kept? 15th day of the 7th month. That's Leviticus chapter 23, verse 39. We skip back down to Leviticus chapter 23, verse 34. It says, speak unto the children of Israel, say unto them, in the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles. So you have two feasts that occur on the same day, okay? You have the Feast of Ingathering and the Feast of Tabernacles, and they occur on the same day, but they have different analogies in which they are associated with. The Feast of Tabernacle is associated with booths, or staying in temporary dwellings, such as tents and things of that nature. And the reason why we observe that is because the Most High made the children of Israel, when he brought them out of Egypt, to dwell in booths, okay? And there's a reason why we to do that. And I'm going to do another teaching on that on the last great day, or the last Shabbat of the feast, which would be the 8th day. I'm going to do a teaching on that. But we have ingathering, which is associated with the ingathering, or the gathering of the fruit of the land, okay? And it is the harvest. It is the harvest. It's associated with the harvest. But it's not the beginning of the harvest. It's actually the end of the harvest, okay? Remember that. Ingathering is the end of the harvest. First fruits, or the Feast of Harvest, is the beginning of the harvest. So you have between Shabuah, or Feast of Weeks, first fruits, then you have until ingathering. That is the length of the harvest. That's when you're going to go out there, and those plants are going to produce their fruit, produce their tomatoes, the wheat, barley. They're going to be producing cucumbers, squash, whatever it is that you planted in the field is going to be producing from that time to that time. You're going to go out there and harvest them every day or every other day, okay? So whenever the fruit comes on the vine, it's ready to pick, you're going to go out there and pick it, okay? But when that time is fulfilled, it's normally around this time. It ceases. Like our garden now, I'm looking down in our garden. We have nothing yielding in our garden right now. The tomato plants are not yielding. The squash plants are not yielding. The okra is not yielding because it's a time whereby those things cease. The harvest has ended. So we are celebrating in gathering and giving praise and worship and thanks unto Yah for the fruit that he has allowed us to gather between the harvest. Okay, so that's what we're doing. That's what that means. All right. Now let's go on to Exodus chapter 23, verse 14. We're going to transition unto there. Exodus chapter 13, 23. Exodus chapter 23, verse 14. All right. This is what it reads. It says, 3 times you shall keep a feast unto Yah in the year. So he says 3 times you shall keep a feast unto Yah in the year. Okay, then he's going to go on and tell us what those feasts are. Verse 15. Let's transition over to verse 15. And it reads, you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days. So he said you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, and you shall eat unleavened bread 7 days. Okay? He says, as I commanded you, he said, I commanded you to do this. He said, you should do that 7 days because I commanded you to do this in the time appointed of the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Mizraim or Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. So what's so significant about the month of Abib, my brothers and sisters? What is so significant about that? All right, let's look up the word Abib to get an understanding of why this is so important to understand what the month of Abib represents, okay? Abib. And the meaning is meaning to be tender, green. That is a young or immature ear of grain. The name of the month Abib or Nisan, which is a Greek word, Nisan. Abib, ear, green ear of corn. So the word Abib represents, agriculturally, it represents a young ear of grain, meaning a wheat seed that has been planted into the ground and it sprouts up, and the grain and the stalk itself is young. It's just not sticking up out of the ground. Probably not even an inch long, or maybe an inch long, sticking up out of the ground. That's what Abib represents. Okay, that's a time of seed sowing time. Okay, because once you plant a seed in the ground, it only takes a few days for it to germinate and to sprout forth out of the ground. All right. So that's very important to understand. The month of Abib is a time of sowing seed. All right. So let's go on further. Exodus chapter 23, verse 16. Look what he goes on to say. He said, and the feast of harvest. He said, not only that, and the feast of harvest, the first fruit of thy labor. So the feast of harvest is first fruits, better known as also Feast of Weeks. It's also called Pentecost or Shabuat in the Hebrew, or Shavuot, which you have sown in the field. So he says, when you get the first fruit of your labors, when that young tender ear of grain has come to its maturity, whereby you are able to reap it, he said you're going to reap it doing first fruit. That is the first fruit of your labor, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering. We read that in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 37 through verse 36 or 37, where we read that on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you gather in the labor, your labors out of the field, you shall have a feast. Okay, the same time tabernacle occurs. Okay, so the feast of ingathering is about gathering in the residue or the completion of the harvest, and because that harvest has ended. All right, and it says, and the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, or the Hebrew word for year is shana, which simply means a revolution of time. I know a lot of times we refer a year to a 12-month period, but in the Hebrew, that word could be also referring to a 12-month period, but it's basically talking about a revolution of time, meaning time where it starts and it ends, okay? And then it's going to come right around to that time again, maybe a few months or a certain period of time. You're going to come back to that point again, a revolution of time. That's what the word Shana or a year means in the Hebrew thought. So the ingathering is the end of the growing season. It is the end of the harvest season. As we explained, you have Abib, which means young tender ear of grain, all right? Then you have the Feast of Harvest, which is first fruits, Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Shavuot, Shabuah, however you want to call it. That begins the harvest because you're going to pick your first produce, and that first produce was offered to Yah for thanks for the bounty of his blessing, or for him to bless your harvest until the 7th month. In the time of ingathering, you would gather in the fruits of your labor from the field, and that would be the end of the growing season or the end of the revolution of that particular time. Okay? Let's continue on. Hallelujah. Now, let's go on to Matthew chapter 13, verse 24, and we're going to equate these analogies that we just went over in Leviticus chapter 23, Exodus chapter 23, verse 14 through verse 16. We talked about sowing time, Abib, the tender ear of grain. We also talked about the Feast of Harvest, which is first fruits, and we talked about ingathering at the end of the Shana, or the revolution of time, that growing season, okay? And we're going to take all these aspects and relate it to the parable of the wheat and the tare, and we're going to see the parable of the three major feasts represented in this. And there's a reason for the harvest. For the harvest is the end of the Shana, the revolution of time. I want you to remember that, because Messiah makes the same statement here in Matthew chapter 13, all right? Let's go to Matthew chapter 13, verse 24. Matthew chapter 13, verse 24. All right? Very important. Matthew, again, chapter 13, verse 24. And it reads, another parable. He said, another parable Messiah spake unto them, or put forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. Remember that. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. So here's an analogy of a good man sowing good seed in the field. All right, we want to skip back to Exodus chapter 23, verse 15, or verse 16. Let's go to verse 16 of Exodus chapter 23. And it says, and the feast of harvest, first fruits of thy labor, which thou hast sown what? In the field. So these seeds were sown in the field. We see that in Exodus chapter 23, verse 16, that the first fruits of the produce that is yielding forth from the seeds that were sown in the field. And in Matthew's, we also see here in the book of Matthew's also that another parable put forth he unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that sowed good seed in the field. And that would be during the time of Abib, or the spring time, okay? Let's continue on to the next verse, all right? Matthew chapter 13, verse 26. Matthew chapter 13, verse 26. Hallelujah. Let me pull it up here for y'all right quick. So that, yeah. All right. And it says, but when the blaze were what? Sprung up, and brought forth fruit. Then appeared the tares also. He says, so when the blade sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares as well. Remember what Abib is. Abib is this. Let's look this word back up again. Abib. Abib meaning to be tender green. That is a young ear of grain. That's what Abib means. So in this scenario that Messiah is given, the parable that he's given, the time whereby the seeds were sown and the blades sprung up, which means they sprung up out of the ground as a byproduct of germination, the seed germinating. This was during the time of Abib. They were still immature. They were still young. They had not came to their full maturity as of yet. And this is going to prove it. We're going to go further on, and we're going to prove this, okay? We're going to prove this. Hallelujah. It says in verse 27, so the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, did not you sow good seed in your field? For which then have come it tares? So the servants of the householder coming to him like, Master, we know that you sowed good seed in your field, so how did this wheat come about? How did this wheat get in here? So what does how did the tare get in there? The tare, all right? How did the tare get sold among the wheat? I want you to understand that the tare represents the nations, the going or the other nations, those that are heathen. Not only that, it also represents those who work iniquity. You could be an Israelite and be a worker of iniquity. You are an example of a tare, all right? Also, a tare looks just like wheat, but the only difference is in the fruit of it, in the grain of it. Does it produce grain? Does it bring forth the fruit that a wheat should bring forth? And tares don't do that. So when you see an individual, they look like a Hebrew, they talk like a Hebrew, they profess to be a Hebrew, but their fruit don't match up with how they look or what they profess to say that they are. That is a tare. We also have physically a group of people who have disguised themselves as true Israel and has taken the true identity of Israel and referred that to themselves. They are tares. They have been planted by the wicked one. We're going to continue on with this read here. Let's continue on to verse 28. Verse 28 of Matthew chapter 13. Hallelujah. So there you are. Okay. Let me turn there to let me turn to Matthew chapter 13, verse 28. For some reason, I left out that particular verse here on my slide. All right. So we're going to read that straight from the book. Matthew chapter 13, verse 28. And it reads, and he said unto them, an enemy has done this. The servant said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? So the Messiah is explaining to them. He said, look, an enemy done this. Someone that hates us, our foe, our adversary. He went among the wheat and sowed in tares. So the enemy had done this. So the servants of the householder asked him, saying, well, do you want us to go and gather up the tare? All right. Now remember that at this point, they had just planted the seeds, and these seeds just begin to germinate probably about a couple of days, maybe 4 or 5 days or 6 days. These seeds have germinated, and they have sprung up out of the ground, but yet when they're examining them, they see that there's wheat sown among the tare. So the servants of the household is saying, do you want us to go out there and root up the tares right now? And this is a state, very vulnerable state for both of the plants, both the tare and the wheat, because they're still immature. They still have not grown to maturity. It is not the time, appropriate time, to be pulling them up or even harvesting these particular plants at this time, because they're still immature. They're still the month of Abib. Okay? But they are examining the situation to see what they are going to do when the proper time comes for them to harvest or to separate the tare from the wheat. I want you to understand something, okay? I want you to understand this analogy, that the month of Abib, both Passover and unleavened bread, is a time of examination. It is a time whereby we examine ourselves. Yah examines us. He tests us. He proves us through the blood of Yeshua HaMashiach. Okay, this is a time of examination. That's why on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we do what? We don't eat any leaven. What does leaven represent? Leaven represents sin. Leaven represents iniquity. That's what leaven represents. Unleavened bread doesn't have any leaven in it. Okay, so it represents purity, righteousness. That's what it represents. Therefore, when we partake of the unleavened bread, it is a sign that we are partaking of righteous acts and righteous deeds. All right. What's another thing that Yah told them to do? He told them during the time of unleavened bread to do what? To get rid of anything that is leavened, to take it out of your house. That means that we rid ourselves of any type of wickedness and sin before Yah during that time, so we can partake of the body and the blood of Messiah and be found worthy to partake of it. All right. And that's why Saul said that a man should examine himself. That's why he said that we don't partake of the feast with the leaven of the scribes of the Pharisees, or the leaven of hypocrisy. Even Messiah said, beware of the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees, which was hypocrisy. All right, that's what tares are. Tares are hypocrites. They talk the part, they look the part, but there's no fruit behind their action and their deed. They don't bring forth fruit. Okay, that's a sense of hypocrisy, and we see that with the other nations. They are hypocrites. They are imposters. Even the Ashkenazi Jews have forged themselves to be, or try to emulate, or try to take the true identity of the house of Israel and try to say that they are the true house of Israel, when historically and biblically they are not. They are tares. They have been sown among the wheat. Do you understand what I'm saying? All right, let's continue on. We're going to go on to verse 29. Now look at what Messiah says here in Matthew chapter 13, verse 29. He said, no, least while you gather the tare, you root up also the wheat with them. So he said, don't go out there in the field. Don't go out there trying to gather the tares yet, unless you uproot the wheat. Now I want you to understand the scenario. Why did Messiah tell them not to go out there? And why, if they would have went out there to gather the tare at that particular time, why would the wheat be uprooted as well too? The reason why is that, the reason for that is because the wheat and the tare, the root system, has not been established in the ground, well established or well anchored in the ground. Okay, so say for instance, if we go out and we plant tomato plants and they're only about this tall, and we plant them, all right, the root system has not dug deep down into the ground yet to anchor themselves. Therefore, if you go and you try to pull up a weed or another plant that's right beside the tomato plant, what's going to happen is you're going to uproot that tomato plant, or you're going to uproot the plant that you actually want to stay in the ground. That's why Messiah told them to wait. Wait, don't do it now, because if you try to pull it up now, you're going to pull up the wheat with it, okay? And see, this is the time frame that I believe that we are in as a people. We are in the time frame spiritually and prophetically where the Most High is examining us. He's examining the crop. We're still at an immature state. We haven't come to the state of maturity yet, okay? We are not yet per se at the ending of the harvest, okay? Some of us are still in this state now. Some of us are ready to be harvested. Some of us are mature. Some of us are bringing forth righteous fruit, okay? But some of us are in the harvest. Some of us are still yet in that maturing stage, okay? Progressing to bear forth fruit that can be harvested, okay? Metaphorically speaking, all right? So the analogy is here, don't pull them up yet, because if you do, you're going to uproot the wheat with them, all right? He says in verse 30, let's continue on. He said, let both grow what? Together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather you together first the tare, bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Who did he say to gather first? He said to gather the tares first. He said the first thing I want you to do at the time of harvest, when the time of harvest comes, when these crops are ready to be harvested, they come to their maturity and they're ready to be ready to reap the fruit of them. He says, I want you to gather the tares first. The tares represents those that are lawless and the heathen nation, the foreign nations, okay? That's what it represents. So we're going to get deeper into that as we go along. But he said, gather the wheat where? Into my barn, into a place of refuge, into a place of preservation to preserve them, all right? So that's what they would do on the Feast of Ingathering. They would take and gather the crops in, put them into a barn to preserve them for the winter months, because you had fall and winter that was coming. And in the winter, you cannot grow crops like that. You cannot grow abundance of crops in the wintertime because of the weather conditions. Cold, freezing, rain, things of that nature, okay? So the ingathering was very important because it is the completion or the ending of the harvest. We are hastening to the ingathering where Yah is going to gather the residue or the remaining of the remnant of Israel. And when he does that, that would be the end of the harvest. Do you understand what I'm saying, my brothers and sisters? That's why it's very important that we understand what the ingathering symbolizes and the metaphors behind it as it relates to agriculture. Because the scriptures, both law and the prophets, and also the writings of the Solution, or what we call the New Testament, is the basis of the metaphors are written in the analogies of an agricultural context. Because our ancestors were herdsmen and farmers. So a lot of the analogies that God gives, even in prophecy, relate to agriculture. Because God himself is an agricultural, a mighty one. He's agricultural minded. When he made Adam and Eve, he placed them in where? A garden with trees, with fruits. And then he told them to keep it. Keep it up. To keep it. He gave them a responsibility to upkeep the garden. Meaning that Adam and Eve were gardeners. They were farmers. That's why when they disobeyed Yah, what did Messiah say to them? What did Yah say to them? What did the Messiah say to them? He told them, he said, cursed be the ground. It's going to yield unto you what? Tares. It's going to yield unto you weeds and thistles. And you're going to have to go out there and labor by the sweat of your brow. So from that standpoint, our ancestors used agricultural analogies to bring into light spiritual matters, prophecy, and such things. So that's why it's very important that we understand these three major feasts, because they are based around an agricultural mindset or an agricultural context. So we see here in the parable that Messiah is given of the end time, is he's given an agricultural aspect of it. Look what he goes on to say. We want to skip down to verse 36 of Matthew chapter 13. And this is where Messiah gives the revelation, or he speaks to his disciple and gives them the revelation of what the parable means, okay? Matthew chapter 13, verse 36. Then it says, Then Yeshua said to the multitude, sent the multitude away, and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares and the tares of the field, he said. And he said unto them, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. So he goes on to explain to them that the man that sowed the good seed, this is the Son of Man, referring to himself, okay? Let's go ahead and skip on down to verse 38. 38 says, And the field is what? The world. So the wheat represents Yisrael. They have been scattered where? Into all the world. All right. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, the inheritors of the kingdom, which is Israel, because the kingdom belongs to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He goes on to say, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. They are the children of the wicked one. Who are the children of the wicked one? Those would be the Goyim, the nation, the heathen nations, the pagan nations, and also all of those who work iniquity. Whether you are an Israelite, I don't care. If you work in iniquity, you are a child of the wicked one. Even Messiah told the scribes and the Pharisees, he said, you have your father who? The devil. And the works of your father do you do. He was a liar from the beginning and bold not in truth. So when you abide not in the truth, you are a child of the wicked one. But the heirs of the kingdom, the heir of the kingdom, or the inheritors of the kingdom of heaven belongs to the nation of Israel. They are the rightful inheritors of the kingdom of Yah. All of those who place their faith in Messiah and observe the law, statutes, and commandments of Yah. Look what he says in verse 39. The enemy that sold them is who? The devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the Malachim, or the angels. So the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the Malachim. Todayah. The reapers are the Malachims. All right. So I want to refer you back to Exodus chapter 23, verse 16 again. Because here in Matthew chapter 13, verse 39, Messiah makes a statement. He said that the harvest is the end of the world. Now look at Exodus chapter 23, verse 16. And it says, and the feast of harvest, the first fruit of thy labor, which you have sown in the field, the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of what? The revolution of time, the Shana, the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of what? The field. Messiah said that the field represents what? The field represents the world. That's what it represents. And then he goes on to say that the harvest is the end of the world. Exodus chapter 23, verse 16 says that in gathering, or the harvest of ingathering, is the end of the revolution of time. So the harvest, when Yah begins to ingather us as a people, that would be the ending of, that would be the end of the world. The ending of that age. Or the ending of that time. So this is very significant in our understanding of the ingathering, the three major feasts, because they are all based upon an agricultural sense. Okay. Now another aspect I want to bring out before we hasten to a close with this teaching here, I want something that really puzzled me was that in this parable, Messiah said that to gather the tares first. Why gather the tares first? So I begin to look in the law and the prophets to see were there any analogies where Yah said that he would gather the nations or the goings. All right. And I found it in Joel chapter 3. And we want to go there. Joel chapter 3. Also, Joel chapter 3 also is a metaphor of a harvest as well. All right. Where Yah will not only gather Israel, but he's going to gather all the other nations as well. He's going to gather the tare as well. I want you to remember that. Not only is Israel gathered, but the tares are gathered as well. The ingathering is just not about gathering the wheat, but it's also about gathering the tare. And he said to gather the tare first. Now look at Joel chapter 3, verse 1. He said, for behold, in those days and in that time, where I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. Look at verse 32. Verse 3, chapter 3, verse 2. He said, I will also gather all nations. He said, I'm going to gather not some nations. He said, but I will gather all nations. He said, I'm going to gather them, bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. So what does the word Jehoshaphat mean in the Hebrew? It means Yah or Yahweh judged. Yahweh judged. So this is going to be a place where Yah is going to judge the nation. Yah said, I will also gather all nations. Not only is he going to gather the remnant of Israel and Yehudah, but he's going to gather all nations. And it says, I will what? Plead with them there for my people. Now this doesn't mean, I don't want you to get this twisted now. This word plead here doesn't mean that Yah is going to get down on his knees and beg the nations of the world to give him his people back. That's not what it means. And a lot of times the English words doesn't do the context justice. That's why you have to look up these words in the Hebrew to better understand the context of what Yah is going to do and how he's going to do it. Because when you look up the word plead, you look at it as like, oh, he's going to beg for them, or he's going to ask them, can he have them back? No, he's not. He doesn't have to ask anybody for anything that belongs to him. Yah says that Israel is his allotted inheritance, and Jacob is his portion. So Yah's inheritance is his people. That is Israel, the true house of Israel. That is his inheritance. So he's not going to get on his knees and cry and plead and beg with the nations of the world to give him his people back. That's not what it means. Let's look up the word. Let's look up this word and see what this word means. All right? I'm going to look it up right quick. Todayah. The word plead here, it is enunciated or pronounced shafat in the Hebrew, which means to judge, pronounce sentence for or against, to vindicate or punish, to govern, to condemn, to avenge, to contend, to execute judgment, judge or judgment, need or to rule. So he's going to vindicate punishment. He's going to vindicate judgment against the nations for his people. He ain't going to sit down and beg and cry and get on his knees and beg and plead like this English word is related to. But the Hebrew word shafat means that he's going to execute punishment and judgment against the nations. That's why he's going to gather them to the valley of Jehoshaphat, because Yah is going to judge the nations on behalf of his people. The harvest is a time of judgment. The ingathering is a time of judgment. Because when you're gathering in your crops, you're gathering in good crops and you're gathering in bad crops as well too. You go to the same plant, you will see good fruit and you'll see bad fruit. You take the good fruit, you put that, you're going to use that. So you're going to preserve that, and you take the evil fruit or the bad fruit, you're going to take that and destroy it. You're going to discard it. So in the process of gathering, he's not going to only gather Israel, but he's going to gather the nations, and he's going to vindicate judgment on them, but he's going to take Israel and put them back in their own land. He's going to take Israel and put them to the born. He's going to preserve Israel and Yehudah. Look what he goes on to say, my brothers and sisters. Hallelujah. He said, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will vindicate judgment, or I will shaphat with them there for my people, for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. Has that not happened? They have parted the land of Yah's land, that he has given to us for an inheritance. Let's keep on going on down. Hallelujah. We stopped at Joel chapter 2. We're going to skip down to verse 9 and verse 10 of Joel chapter 3. We're going to skip down to verse 9 and verse 10 of Joel chapter 3. And it says, proclaim ye among the Gentiles, or going. All right. Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords. What is plowshares? That is instruments of agriculture, like a hoe or like a mattock, something that you dig with. He said, I want you to take your instruments of agriculture, and I want you to take the iron of them and beat them into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Let's continue on. Todayah. Verse 11 and verse 12. He said, assemble yourselves. Come, all ye heathen. Gather yourselves together round about. Hither. Come, you mighty ones. Come down, O Yah. You mighty ones. Come down, O Yah. Let the heathen be weakened. And come, let the heathen be wakened. And come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the heathen round about. Y'all said, I'm gonna judge all these heathens round about. And look what he says in verse 13. This is what I want you to catch here. Here goes the harvest aspect of it. He said, put in what? Your sickle. Put in your sickle. What does this word sickle mean in the Hebrew? This word sickle, it is pronounced magal. Magal in the Hebrew, which means to reap. He said, I want you to put in your sickle. He said, for it is the time to reap. Look what he said. For the harvest is what? The harvest is ripe. He said the harvest is ripe. So here in Joel chapter 3, verse 1 through verse 13 so far is an indication, the context that he is referring to is a similitude of a harvest. Remember that the harvest is the end of the world. The harvest is the gathering or the ingathering of crops. That's what it is. You have it at the beginning or the start of it begins at the Feast of Pentecost or First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Harvest. It begins at that time. It ends at the time of ingathering, which is on the 15th day of the 7th month. That's when it ends. That is the ingathering. That's what the ingathering signifies, okay? Remember that the Messiah, when he spoke of the parable of the wheat and the tare, he said that the harvest is what? The harvest is the end of the world. Also remember in Exodus chapter 23, verse 16 that we read, that the ingathering is the end of the Shanai, the revolution of time. So the scenarios, examining them and comparing them, we see the similarities in how Yah equates the feast with the end time and an agricultural season, which ultimately signifies the ending or the end of the world. So that's why it's very important for us to understand the times of the season that God has commanded for us to observe, because they are a shadow of things to come, and it also puts us in remembrance of what things have already transpired. So we have to understand that, my brothers and sisters. And let's continue on. You continue on in the verse. He said, "Get you down, for the press is full, the fat overflows, for the wickedness is great." He said, it's time to put in the sickle now. He said, the press is full. It's not halfway. It's not immature. The fruit is not immature now. It's going to come to its fruition. It is time to harvest, because what? The harvest is ripe. Let's look at that word ripe too. Let's get an understanding of that word ripe here. The word ripe in the Hebrew is bashal, which means to boil up, to be done in cooking, to be ripened, to bring forth is ripe. All right. So let's say, for instance, if you're cooking a meal, right? If you're cooking a meal, whether it be potatoes, French fries, or hamburger or a hot dog, you're gonna cook it until it's done, and then you'll partake of it, right? That's what the harvest means. The harvest is an indication that the produce or the plant is bearing forth fruit that has come to its completion, is mature. Now it's time to harvest that. It is the end of the world. The harvest season is the end of the world. Okay. So when God gathers the nations together to the valley of Jehoshaphat to judge them, and he gathers his elect, he gathered Yisrael and Yehuda together, judgment's going to fall upon the goyim of the nations of the tares, and the wheat is going to be taken into the barn. All right. The barn also represents the land of inheritance. He's going to cause us to dwell in the land safely. He's going to preserve us in our own land. Todayah. All right, let's continue on. Let's do Joel chapter 3, verse 14 to verse 15. He said, multitudes, multitudes, in the valley of decision, for the day of Yah is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. Hallelujah. So we see here in the analogies, comparing them, we can see the similarities of how the parable of the wheat and the tare also correlates with the feast days, the three major feasts, Pentecost, Passover, Pentecost, and in gathering. All right. These three feasts were based upon a agricultural aspect. Okay. So that's how we are able to get a type or some type of shadow of what's to come. And that's why it is very important that we remember these days, that we keep these days as the Torah tells us to. We understand, okay, is sacrifices done away with? No. Is offerings done away with? No. No, it's not. Is the sin offering done away with? No. There still remains a sacrifice for our sin, but that sacrifice has been fulfilled in Messiah, in Yeshua. So in order for us to repent, we still have to acknowledge the sacrifice that was given on behalf of our sin, and that was Messiah. We still have to offer to God sacrifices and offerings, but we do that through our bodies being a living example. Offering up our body as a living sacrifice, the fruit of our lips, being an offering well pleasing unto Yah. So there still is a physicality or a physical aspect with the spiritual. You know, when I hear people tell, well, we memorialize the feast, or we acknowledge the feast, or whatnot, but we don't keep it. What's the difference? How can you recognize something without keeping it? That's almost like saying, I recognize that I have a job, but I'm not going to go and do the work. If you have a job and you're not going to do the work, do you truly recognize that job? Or if you invite someone over to your house and you never talk with them or entertain them or spend time with them, are you truly acknowledging those people? Would that be a dishonor? Yes, that would be. If you invite someone to your house or someone invites you over to their house and you don't spend time with them, talk with them, conversate with them, fellowship with them, but yet you say, well, I'm just going to memorialize this time. But yet you're not putting forth any actions or deeds to do anything that the memorial requires for you to do, then how are you memorializing that time? What's the difference between keeping something and memorializing it? It's the same. All the feast days, that's all they are memorials. They are rehearsals. We are to rehearse the scenarios because it helps us to understand the physicality of the spiritual aspect of doing it in the physical. We have made the spiritual realm to be some type of fictitious, translucent type of analogy that is mythical, but it's not. Say, for instance, how do you know, if you're sitting down listening to me right now, or if you're going to go back and listen to this video later on, how do you know, or how are you able to discern that I am a spiritual man? Because I can talk like this to you all day long. It may look like I'm spiritual. It might look like I know what I'm talking about. But how do you know, how are you able to judge and discern whether or not Raah Pathwal is a spiritual man? And we know that the spirit is invisible, right? You can't see it. But does it not manifest itself in the natural form, in the natural sense, or in the carnal realm? Yes, it does. Because you're able to judge whether or not I'm spiritual or not by my actions and my deeds. So the physical of the natural aspect of things is just a manifestation of the spiritual things. That's what it is. If you say you have the Spirit of God dwelling in you, then that means that you're going to live your life, your action, your deed, your conduct, the way you dress, how you do things, what you do, your interaction, your relationship with other people is going to reflect your spirit. And that's how you're able to judge whether or not that person is walking in the Spirit. Don't we have fruits of the Spirit? What do you think fruits of the Spirit are? They are physical and natural and emotional traits that we are able to see, feel, and touch visibly in the natural realm, that we're able to discern whether or not this person has the Spirit of Yah. So those that quote the feast and say, well, I'm going to keep it spiritually, you still have to do what's required. Because if you're not doing what's required in the feast to the best of your ability, then you're not keeping it spiritually as well. Because the Spirit is manifest through action and deeds. That's how the spirit realm manifests itself. Say, if I have a spirit of adultery or a spirit of a lie, if I have a lying spirit or a lying tongue, how are you going to be able to discern that if the spirit is just this mythical, translucent thing that no one can detect or see or discern? Even when the Spirit was poured out upon those disciples in the day of Pentecost, don't you know that they saw it visibly? The scripture says that the Spirit descended on them like cloven tongues of fire. How were they able to write that if they did not see that manifest? It came in like a mighty rushing wind. How were they not able to identify the Spirit if it did not show up there in the natural aspect? Whether it be wind, whether it be fire, whether it be water, it manifested itself, the Spirit of Yah. And the Spirit of Yah is manifest in us, through us. That's how the Spirit of Yah is manifested. That's how other people are able to see that you have the Spirit of Yah, that you're a spiritual person, because the Spirit of Yah is not only in you, but it works through you. So how are you able to say that you're keeping the spirit of the Ruach of the feast, but yet there's no representation of it in your life? God tells us to take 7 days out of 365 days that is in one Gregorian year, 7 days to sleep out of tents, and we said we can't do it until we get into the land. That's a lie from the pit of hell. That is a lie. In the book of Ezekiel, Yah said that he will be a sanctuary for us in all the nations that he has scattered us to. In every place he has scattered us to, he said, I will be your temple. I will be your sanctuary. I will be that sacred place. That's why in the book of John, chapter 3, when Messiah was speaking with the woman at the well, that the woman said to him, look, my forefathers, we worship here in this mountain. But you Israelites, you Yahadim say that Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. And Yeshua looked her square in the face and said, the hour coming when you will not worship in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem, but those that worship me will worship me in spirit and in truth. We still have to worship Yah, but we do it in the spirit and according to truth. What is truth? The truth is Yah's word. It is his law, statutes, and commandments. So how can you say that you're worshiping Yah in spirit when you're not obeying the truth? You are a liar. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many followers you have. It don't make no difference. You are a liar. And the truth is not in you, nor is the spirit of Yah in you. It doesn't make any difference, my brothers and sisters. We need to stop with the excuses, and we need to stop with the shenanigans. We can't keep the feast because we're not in the land. That's not so, my brothers and sisters. The whole time when the children of Israel were in the land of Mizraim and in the wilderness, they kept the feast of Yah. And even when they entered into the land, the scripture says they kept the Passover in Gilgal. That wasn't the place where Yah placed his name at. But there were certain requirements that were required of them, both of them and things that had to occur in the land before they could keep it in Jerusalem. But before they kept it in Jerusalem, they kept it in other places, even though they were in the land of Israel. The first time recorded in the history of our ancestors where they kept the feast in Jerusalem was when the temple was dedicated, and Solomon, during the time when Solomon came to be king, that's when they kept the feast in Jerusalem. Even during the time of David, when he was king, they did not keep the feast in Jerusalem because David was still securing the territories of Israel during that time. During the time of David was a time whereby the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, was still at war. When you look at Deuteronomy chapter, I believe it's Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 13, where Moshe gives, tells the children of Israel, when you get into the land, God's going to give you a place whereby you will bring your sacrifices and your offerings. Okay? But he said, when you dwell in the land safely, that's what he said. He said, when you dwell in this land safely, then God's going to give you a place whereby you will go take your offerings and your sacrifices too. So they had to dwell in the land safely even before they could even go to Jerusalem to worship Yah. So the whole time when they crossed over Jordan, from the time all the way up to the time of David, they still didn't keep the feast in Jerusalem. They still kept the feast, but they didn't keep it in Jerusalem because they were not dwelling in the land safely yet, and they had not purged out the Jebusites and the Hittites and the Hivites out of the land. It took them thousands of years to rid the land of all the other nations that were there before them. Even in the book of Joshua, certain places where even the tribe of Judah, when they were given their right of inheritance, there were Jebusites that were dwelling in the land there. Even at that time. So they couldn't even keep the feast in Jerusalem until they cleansed the land of all the foreigners and all the heathen that were occupying the land before they came into it. But even during that time, they still kept the feast, even though they did not keep the feast in Jerusalem. It wasn't until when King Solomon came along and the temple was built in Jerusalem, they kept the feast in Jerusalem. And that's why Messiah stated to the woman at the well, he said, look, there's going to come a time you ain't even going to worship in this Mount Noah in Jerusalem. Why? Because he knew that in 70 AD, that Jerusalem would be destroyed and the temple would be destroyed and that Israel would be dispersed. And that's why when you look in the book of Ezekiel, you would see that Yah told the children of Israel, he said, to those of you Israelites whom I have scattered throughout the nations of the earth, I have driven you throughout the countries. He said, I'm going to be a sanctuary unto you. And you look at that word sanctuary, it means temple. It means sacred place. That's what it means. And I got a whole teaching on that, brothers and sisters. Go to my YouTube page, True Remnant Ministry, and look for the teaching concerning the sanctuary. I got all the scriptures. I got all the history. I break it down in detail. Go to it and view that teaching if you want to get an understanding on why we should observe the feast of Yah. Because, no, we don't have it perfect, but they are just rehearsals. This is rehearsing us for something that's going to happen. And these lame excuses that we use are not sufficient enough. You can go buy you a tent and sleep in that tent for 7 days. You can put things in that tent whereby it will be comfortable. Say, for instance, we have a tent. I have 3 kids. My wife purchased a big enough tent for my kids to have one side. We took their little beds, their mattresses, we put it in there. They even have a little section where they have toys and stuff in there. They have their Kindles and stuff like that for a little bit of entertainment, laptops and all that stuff. He didn't say you couldn't have that in there. So you can come up with creative ideas to make it comfortable. But we want to make excuses and yet walk around grinning and skinning and saying we Hebrew Israelites. But the Torah says that all Israel shall dwell in tents. Let me read that. I was going to say that for later on, but I'm going to deal with it just a little bit right now. Let's deal with that right quick. I'm going to go to Leviticus chapter 23. Now, this is Torah. This is Torah. He said that this shall be a statute for you throughout your generations. He didn't say you have to be in the land to do this, my brothers and sisters. He did not say that. He said this should be a statute for you throughout your generations. Let's start with verse 39 of Leviticus chapter 23. And I'm going to read this out of the scriptures. It said, also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of thy land, you shall keep a feast unto your 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath. On the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. And you shall take of you on the first day broods of goodly trees. And we do that. We take leaves of palm trees, of evergreen trees and things of that nature. And we wave it before Yah. And we rejoice, we sing, we praise, and we dance before Yah. Now look what he says here. I want to skip on down. Verse 41. He says, and ye shall keep it a feast unto your 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever. What do you don't get about forever? He said, it shall be a statute that is forever. Look what he goes on to say. Forever in your generations, you shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelite born shall dwell in booths. Tell me why you can't do that. Oh, we're not in the land. What does it say that you have to be in the land? You think when Moses was speaking this to them, you think the children of Israel were in the land then? They were in the wilderness doing this stuff. But look at the excuses. The excuses that make up excuses. Oh, I can't do this. Oh, I can't do that. Make up every excuse of why you can't do. Y'all's not coming back for excuses, my brothers and sisters. I say this out of love. I'm not trying to say this to condemn nobody. I don't have a heaven and hell to put you in. I can't tell you you're going to hell because you do this now, because that's not my job. Only the Most High can make that decision. I didn't make heaven, nor did I make hell. So I can't tell you you're going to hell, but I can tell you that you're wrong. I can tell you that. And that we need to be more serious about y'all. Some of y'all, when y'all were Christians, y'all would break y'all neck to celebrate Christmas. You break your neck to celebrate Halloween. You will forsake everything to make sure that your kids had an Easter dress or an Easter bunny or an Easter egg hunt. But when we transition over to this truth, and we have Memorial Days, we have Kodesh days or holy days that the Most High tells us to do, we got people that make every excuse on why we shouldn't do it when it's in our power to do such things. Don't tell me that it's not in your power, that you can't go buy a tent and stay in it 7 days when you got Gentiles and crackers out here that go out here and they stay in tents for 7 days and they don't even complain about it. And they not even true Israel. But you got the Negroites who will complain about everything. They want to make excuses on why they can't do this and do that. And you think when Yah says in Ezekiel that he is going to gather us from the nations and put us in the wilderness and he's going to purge out the rebels, how you think you're going to be living then? You think you're going to be living in a 2-story house with central air and heat? You think you're going to have running water? You think you're going to have a grocery store and a car to go drive to it and pay for your food and get what you want? You think you're going to have gas or electric stove to cook on? These things are rehearsals. Why can't we do it, Israel? Why do we make excuses to why we can't do it? When you do it, you will see the beauty of it. And the thing about it, the ironic thing about it, just listen to this. Just hear me one moment. You got people out here who will stay in tents in the month of June, but when the 7th month come around, they're making excuses on to why they can't stay in booths or tents. How stupid is that? If you are an Israelite-born person, if you say and you believe in your heart that you are a true descendant of the house of Israel, your butt should be in a booth or a tent or some temporary dwelling place. If it's not, I have to question whether you're an Israel or not. Because he said in the Torah that all Israel shall dwell in booths. That's not something that's impossible, or that's not something that anybody's incapable of doing. You can do that. Even if you're in the suburb, you can set up a little tent behind your house and stay in it for 7 days. And your kids will love it. And the whole purpose is for this purpose. Look at this. He said that your generations might know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Mizraim. I am Yah, your Most High. And Moses declared unto the children of Israel the feast of Yah. That's what he did. He said, I want you to do this so that you might know, that you might recognize, that you might yada in the Hebrew. that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of Mizraim. Now, they probably was living in tents. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So they probably was staying in tents for 40 years, and God just asked you to stay in a tent for 7 days. And we're making up all kinds of excuses. We need to stop with the excuses, brothers. We can do it. You can stay in the tent for 7 days. You can get you a big enough tent whereby you can put you a couch in there, put you a screen TV, you can put you a TV in there, put you a stove in it, and live like you just in a house. Some of y'all got the money to do that. So if you feel like you're going to be disfranchised of your creature comforts, just get a tent and put the same things in it that you will have in your house. And it will be comfortable. You want to hardly be able to tell the difference. Or get with some people that know what they're doing. Ask them, how do I do this thing? Let's stop making excuses on why we can't do what God tells us to do, brothers and sisters, because we can do it. We can do it. It's not going to be no excuse. You're not going to be able to stand before y'all and say, well, we wasn't in the land. And y'all going to look at you and say, well, did I not say I would be a sanctuary for you? Wherever you go, did I not say I would be your temple? 2 Corinthians says that know you not that you are the temple of the Most High, that the Most High dwells in you? So God dwells in us. His name is in us. That is the spiritual and the physical aspect of it. When we get into the land, when Jerusalem is rebuilt, the temple is established again under the rule and the reign of Yahshua HaMashiach. And when he calls us to dwell in our land safely, then we'll be able to go to Jerusalem and worship. Until then, we still have to keep these feast days. We still have to do them the way that he's commanded for us to do them. And the children of Israel still kept the feast, even though they were in the land, they didn't keep it in Jerusalem because the requirements of doing it in Jerusalem were not complete yet. That didn't happen until all the way up to Solomon. It took them hundreds of years to get to the point whereby they can even keep it in Jerusalem. Because through the book of Joshua, to the book of Judges, to 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, even the era of David, they still had foreign nations dwelling among them. That's why they was fighting and warring, because David was trying to drive them all out so he could build a temple. So that Jerusalem could be a place for people to come and worship at. I pray that this teaching was a great inspiration to your heart. Once again, I am Raah Pathwal Ben Yaakov. You've been viewing True Remnant Ministry. And join us next week. We'll be on here. I might switch it up a little bit. We're going to probably start doing it from YouTube again. I've been trying Facebook Live and everything. But the thing about that, I just haven't found a way to upload the videos from Facebook onto the YouTube channel. But you can do YouTube Live, and then once you finish the broadcast, you can upload the video to Facebook and other social media outlets. So I'm probably going to do it that way because it'll be easier to upload the videos to my YouTube page, okay? So I want you to join us here again on next Shabbat at 11:30 a.m., all right? We're going to be probably talking about Romans chapter 10, verse 4. Is Messiah the end of the law? And what does the word end mean? What does that word mean? Because a lot of people get that word confused. I got someone to write me and tell me that basically I was wrong for keeping the Torah because Messiah ended the Torah, that he's the end of the law. And they quoted from Romans chapter 10, verse 4. And we're going to bring that out in depth and profound a study on that so that you will have clarity and that you will be able to explain it to other people that might try to use that verse incorrectly. And everything of that nature. So until next time, we say shalom to you. May the Most High keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you and give you shalom. Shalom Kol Yisrael.